Well, hello, and welcome to the podcast where we talk about creating experimental art in trauma-informed and sustainable ways that support artists, our communities, and our organization as a whole. I'm Hannah B, and I'll be your host for this episode of Any Other Anythings. Welcome to episode 11 of season 3 of Any Other Anythings. I'm Hannah B, and I will be the host for this episode. This is my second season here with Gray Box Collective, and I'm so excited to continue making weird art about difficult things. It's one of my favorite things to do, and I'm so honored to do it with Gray Box. But today I'm here with Molly. Hi, Molly.
Hey.
In a moment, we're going to get into more of Molly's origin story, but first we're going to start with a little check-in and resourcing first. So, hi, Molly, how are you doing and what are you thinking about?
Hey, Hannah B. I'm doing well. It was not the day I anticipated. I've noticed like coming out of COVID and pandemic and like living on Zoom, like this transition back to in real life, I've tried to have like Zoom days and non-Zoom days. And then it's the days where I have to be both in person and on Zoom. It gets to be a lot. So yeah, but this is like my last stop of the day. So I'm excited about that. I'm excited to chat. I think I mentioned this in one, I actually don't know if it was recording when I mentioned this in another episode, that like it was really cool in season 1 that I got to talk to everyone. And now with sharing the hosting responsibilities, I don't get to chat with everyone. So I'm excited to chat with you today. So how are you, Hannah B?
Oh, I'm doing good. I'm excited to get to talk to you too, Molly. Yeah, today's been a bit crazy, to be honest. It's been I use my voice all the time, just like you, Molly, with teaching all day long. So I'm a little peopled out. So it's been kind of nice to just sit with someone familiar that I enjoy talking to, instead of it feeling like work. That's what's kind of nice, is that talking with each other doesn't always feel like work. So yeah, I'm doing pretty good though.
Good. Would you like me to facilitate the resourcing activity we talked about?
Of course, yes.
Okay. So we talked about Hannah, one of your favorite ones being like when we start on the ground and we slowly build movement up from the ground. And so thinking about like what would be a way to transition that onto the podcast today, thinking about bringing movement from like the bottoms of our feet all the way to the rest of our body. So I will facilitate that. And like if you're listening to this when you're driving, maybe not follow all of my cues, but like as always, take what you need, leave the rest behind, edit as you wish. And I'll also add, I'll focus mostly on joints. I really love resourcing activities that focus on our skeletal system. Like that is our built-in support system. I think it's great to be reminded of it. It's also like, it's really solid in our body, which can help our nervous system. And you know, I love my nervous system stuff. It can help our nervous system like just really know where we are in time and space and bring us into the present moment. So wherever you are, if you want to change positions at any point, you're welcome to. But we'll start with bringing your awareness to your feet and specifically to your toes, and then starting to find all the different ways that your toes can wiggle, all the different movements of your toes. And maybe you can find like some differentiation. I've been practicing like my big toe moving differently than my other toes. Yes, and it's hard to talk and practice that one, so I'm going to go back to wiggling. And then letting that movement start to come up to your ankles. And with your ankles, yes, you can circle them around. You can go through eversion and inversion, so that like windshield wiper or back and forth. Mine are cracking. I don't know if the microphone's picking it up. Sorry. No, okay.
It's not catching it.
Okay, good. And then to our knees, So insert that hinge joint and just getting curious about like what's possible in our knees right now. And what I also enjoy about going through the skeletal system is we get to alternate between those really mobile joints like the ankles and then the more stable joints like our knees that just hinge. A little extra movement in there, but for the most part, just hinging. Then into our hips. So if you're seated, you're going to feel your hips start to really kick in for this one. And then hips are also our hip sockets are very mobile joints. So you got that ball and socket, all sorts of options. You're welcome to stand if able and if you want to, or just wiggle and see what happens. Then we can start to bring that movement up our spine, right? So you can start with our lumbar spine. So that's really low spine. Maybe the sacrum is a nice visual, that triangle at the back of our pelvis. Then it can ripple up to more thoracic spine between our shoulder blades. Maybe the shoulder blades start to get some movement in. Think of the shoulder blades like gliding over your rib cage. Then let's take a little detour to our actual shoulder joints. So like our hip joints, right? Ball and socket, lots of options. And we can go for symmetry or asymmetry, whatever feels best. And you can always explore and get curious and like backtrack if needed. If you do something, you're like, I don't like that, and stop. It's okay. It's your body. You make your choices, right? All right, and then to our elbows. So our elbows, like our knees, that hinge, not as many options there. And then into our wrists. If you want, you can also like hold your forearm with one hand and then explore the wrist movement. You can feel the bones of your forearm moving underneath your hand, maybe. Maybe that's a fun sensation. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's somewhere in between. And we can get into our hands more. We can get into our fingers. And then taking it back through the arms to the wrists, to the elbows, shoulders, come back to your spine, cervical spine, so the top of our spine, our neck, allowing us to look around. You can shake your head yes and no, and side to side for I don't know. That's the top of our spine. Woo. How's that, Hannah B?
That is definitely what I needed. That felt so good.
Okay.
Even doing that sitting, it just feels like such a good reset for my body. Especially with a lot of us, our jobs is sitting a lot. And so even by allowing us, instead of having to go to the floor and by the end you need to be jumping in the air with this insane amount of energy, that this is just a good way to build yourself up. It feels regulating. It feels really good in my body. How about you?
Good. Yes, I think I forget like how easy it is to do that and how you can do it like anywhere, anytime. And it can be, I wasn't watching the clock, it can be several minutes like what I just did, but you can also just kind of go through it.
Yeah.
In like under a minute. And yeah, it's amazing the difference that it can really make.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel nice and warm now too.
I know. I feel
it's like super cold, but yeah.
Well, you know how some like colors and things in life just make you feel cold? It gives you that cold feeling. I feel like even just by, and cold isn't bad. Cold is still good. There's no good or bad, I feel like, but adding the warm back in, I feel like makes my brain ready.
Oh yeah.
So I enjoyed that, which is, whole nervous system, all the wonderful things.
Yes. Yes. Well, and that's Twilight says like a warm body is a ready body. So like, yeah, whether you are dancing or whether we're here, like I feel like my voice has even changed in just that.
Yeah. All right. So one of the things we're doing slightly differently this season, we're dividing out each episode into 3 segments. So the first segment is focusing on GBC Creative's personal stories. Another section is to talk about behind the scenes of our most recent projects. And the last section is where we lean into any other anythings, which is our title. It's how we choose what we want to spark a conversation about today. It brings us all together. The any other anythings are the little sprinkles on top, I feel like. In our conversations, it brings the richness and the humanity into a lot of our projects, I feel like. So for a little transparency, we talked about structure and content of today prior to recording. So a lot of our content is spontaneous. The form we're working within has already been agreed upon by the both of us. Up first, we have holding space for GBC Creative's origin stories on this platform. Origin stories can take a lot of shapes and it can look differently for anyone, but we like to think of them as clues throughout our lives that suggested where we'd end up here today, physically, professionally, personally, however way we want to focus on. Another way to think of these stories is parts of our journey. They don't always make it into our bios or our websites, but it's things that we want to include as part of our lives. So today I'm holding space for Molly to share her story. As a formal exercise, this is often done with the challenge to the listener to hold space for the speaker without interjection, with minimal nonverbal communication, little vocal responses. So I'm going to go quiet, and Molly, whenever you're ready.
Cool. Thank you. So I realized, I think it was like this morning when I was getting ready for this, I was like, I didn't think this through because it's like, I have to do this too. So it feels like coming full circle. And I will say as well, because I have the Trauma Informed Creative Practices podcast, I do like a really big origin story, because you don't just like accidentally end up talking about trauma and creativity in your life. So I was like, okay, what could I really pull in for this today as my origin story and some of the clues? And so I think I'll focus mostly on, I call myself an accidental entrepreneur. I like never intended to like have a company, well, like sort of. I never thought of myself as a real like business human until probably the past year or two, when I was like, oh, I have like multiple LLCs. Like it's not just Greybox. Like I got other LLCs, like got the nonprofit branch. I've got like other entities in the works. And so it's like, I guess I'm like a serial entrepreneur, but I did not intend to do that. And so I was like, where did that start? Because that wasn't the goal, that wasn't the dream, right? And I think about my best friend in high school. It was like, she was always the business person, like was gonna major in business, had the plan, knew that like business was her track. And I was like, oh, I'm gonna like have a dance studio, but I didn't connect that to actually being in business. And so when I was thinking about like, how did I accidentally run companies, or even end up on this route? I mean, it goes back to like very young, like grade school. So I grew up in Maine, and like your cliche, not a log cabin in the middle of the woods, but pretty close. I was the only kid it was like a dirt road that like ended in the lake. So very, very isolated. And I was the only kid on the road at that time when I was growing up. And so I was the one that was always doing the dog walking, the dog sitting, cat sitting. When there were baby born, like I was the babysitter on the road. Like I just kind of fell in that quite naturally. And let's see, I think it was summer after I turned 16, my parents were like, could you get a job? Like a real one, quote unquote. And so my friend who went into business got me a job working as a receptionist at Charlie's Toyota in Scion in Augusta, Maine. So I was like answering calls for Toyota. That was my first official job. And I think I quit about 6 months in. I was like, yeah, this isn't for me. When I wasn't answering phones, I was like doing filing, and you sit in like their tire room. And so I would like go home smelling like tires for filing, and it just wasn't my thing. So I quit, and my parents were like, what are you going to do? And I was like, I'm going to teach dance. And small town perks put a little like, I don't know, 4x4 ad in the local newspaper, and was like, dance lessons in the summer. And that's what I did like for most of high school. And then I was going to have Miss School of Dance. Like when I took website design back in like the early 2000s, so like not pretty website design by today's standards. Like I made Miss Molly's School of Dance like website. So that was always kind of there. And think again, my parents, when I was like, yeah, I'm gonna just like have a studio. I don't need to go to college. They're like, could you like maybe just go to college, take like a business math class or something? And then once I got into college, like I think I kind of got hooked on it, and ended up getting 2 master's degrees. And so like went through that academic journey. And have now circled back to, after a 10-year career in higher ed, circled back to being a full-time freelancer entrepreneur. And I guess the other one that other origin story that I'll run parallel to this is like how I ended up with a real interest in interdisciplinary arts. Like I've always been interested in all kinds of arts, visual and performing. But I think it was in high school. No, I can actually trace this back. I think I told this story, watching Xanadu growing up. So there's the scene where I don't remember actors' names. Like one wants a bandstand in this like music hall, and the other's like, no, it's got to be like 80s electronic. And then in the scene, they merge the two dance styles as well as the music forms. And it was on VHS, so I had to like rewind it and watch it over again, and then like hit rewind, wait for it to go back. And I'd watch that scene over and over again. And I think there's something about that visual merging of forms that I found really interesting. And then in high school, when I started, because you're supposed to like look at colleges and, plan your future or whatever, I had 2 goals. I wanted to stay in Maine and I wanted to major dance, and I couldn't do that. And so I started looking at theater programs as they were close. And I ended up majoring in theater, which again, my first advising appointment in college was with Dr. Sandra Hardy. And she, like, my first conversation was, I don't want to be a theater major. And she was like, just your classic New Yorker in the middle of Maine doing, running or being a part of that theater program. And she's like, give it a semester. And I was like, okay, that feels reasonable. And I'm actually really glad I stayed with theater and all of that. But what I would do is like try to sneak dance into my theater. So like in a directing class, it was like, cool, I'm going to just have like a 10-minute dance break in the middle of this show. And I think that sneaking the art I wanted into the art that I had to do was how I continued pushing continued to explore the interdisciplinary nature of it all. And those are the clues that I'm going to share today, at least. Yeah. Thanks for holding space, Hannah.
Of course. Awesome. Thank you, Molly, for sharing that. That's so awesome. If it's okay if I respond.
Yeah, please do.
So as someone who has seen you from afar from my freshman year of college, and you as my professor, I've always just been curious about how you had gotten into the space of being a dance professor. And what I had you first was for somatics and yoga. So I feel like I've gotten to see a lot of different sides of you. So it was really cool to get to hear that story for the first time about your background. That's so awesome.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I guess like that's just context for our listeners, is that's how we overlapped, was when I was teaching and you were a student.
Mm-hmm.
What was your freshman year? I was trying to think of this the other day. I don't remember why. Was it 2017, 2018?
Yeah, so it was 2017 fall, 2018 spring. So I had you 2017 fall for somatics.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah.
Gosh, feels long ago. Okay.
It feels forever ago for me too. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. So now we're going to get into the creative process and behind the scenes of the most recent projects you're working on with GBC. Now, with almost any creative pursuits, the final project, performance, all of it it's just sharing a tiny part of the work with audiences. So much time and energy happens well before audience are aware of a project, and we want to take some space to share about our creative processes as individuals and within the company. So Molly, is there any insight you can give us from your point of view about our projects or how you were inspired for this season?
Yeah. This season, I feel like things have gotten really solid is the word I'm going to toss out. I'm not sure that's really the one I want, but yeah. Become clear. I don't know, something. I mean, it's also okay. So Gray Box Collective has been around for 7 seasons, so 7 years. And I mean, half of those years have been spent adapting to COVID and the pandemic. And so like navigating the majority of the time when most companies are gaining traction through a pandemic has been really interesting. And I think it just expedited, like we would have gotten here eventually. And I think this just expedited things. So, I mean, the projects, the way that the seasons are going to, at least at this time of recording, move forward is basically 4 projects per season, and keeping the film digital aspect in. So having a film version of whatever the focus is or the theme is for that season, having our in-person performance, like I feel like that's the root, that is the thing that Gray Box Collective was created around, so that's going to stay. And then the 2 other projects that I think have made their place within the company has been the podcast as well as the coloring book. And so this season we're doing 2 seasons of, okay, wait, how do I say this? This season of like Gray Box Collective, we're doing 2 seasons of Any Other Anythings, just as kind of playing catch up. But most Gray Box Collective seasons will have 1 season of Any Other Anythings. And what I enjoy about that is it really gives like this 50-50 to the process and the products, for lack of another way to say it right now. Where we have the film and the performance that's in person, that's like the things that we create. And now we have these 2 other projects of the coloring book that's also an activity book, and then the podcast to talk more about the process. And it's the process that I get really excited about. Like the performance is great and the release of the film is great. And it's like just so little compared to all that we put into it, you know? So yeah, I don't know if I actually answered your questions. Would you like me to unpack anything more specific in that?
No, I think you answered the question. That's awesome. So I guess I'd like to dive deep more into the rehearsal space and your role as the facilitator and the director in the rehearsal space. So for any aspiring directors or rehearsal directors out there, what is something that you find to be effective when you're running a group of creatives where everything is spontaneous in the moment, things can change? What are things that you look for that you want them to hold on to and develop?
Ooh, that's a doozy of a question.
Sorry.
No, that's good. Could you say it for me one more time?
I'll try.
Okay.
So for anyone aspiring to be a rehearsal director for any type of, I don't want to call it improvisational work, but definitely within our rehearsals, it is very improvisational. What are tools that you use as a director to identify things that are effective for what you're trying to portray in a performance?
Yeah. Okay. I've got some responses. I have no idea if they are answers. Although I've been getting more towards saying like, I don't have answers. I have opinions and I have questions. So.
Okay. Yeah. I love that.
Okay. So I think one of the things is going big picture for a moment of, I think especially like for us coming from the like studio dance world, it's like, oh, I hear a song and I can see the dance and that's what's going to be on stage, right? Like there's this vision and we're going to put it out there. That is not how, I mean, I've done that before, but I'm at a place now where it's more like, what do I want to spark conversation about? And that is the part of like what each episode is going to also include. So I think of it more as like planting a seed and saying like, who wants to like water this and care for this with me? So that's kind of the approach. And I think even just entering with that, it's a very different energy, as opposed to like, here's the vision and we're all going to go towards it. It's okay, here's this thing that we're all going to see grow. And then I think in the moment for these rehearsals, it's a lot of like teasing things out for me, teasing things out and also being open to those serendipitous moments that like you could not choreograph, like those gorgeous moments in whether that's a rehearsal or in a show where it's like you like, yes, like that is just it. There's a presence that that time and space and like all the stars aligned or whatever cliche you want to toss in there, that led to that. But I think the teasing things out is one of the things that's been really important for me more recently. And teasing out and like creating space. Because one of the things that we do is a very short rehearsal process and development process. And I talk about this a lot with trauma-informed creative practices and seeing it now kind of ooze into the organization of as a whole is the need for space, and not necessarily timing wise. It's not necessarily slowing down. It's just having those like kind of bursts and letting things settle, and the separation. What are the words I'm looking for? Kind of the separation of like a lot of little things, like content versus form, like where we are right now in the process is like, does the form itself work, like flocking or follow the leader, right? Like, does the form itself work with this group before we start to like muck it up with whatever kind of content we're tossing into it? So that like separation of things, I think, is really important. Even the separation of like the development process, and some of this comes from working with Tomas Stanton, of like the editor and the creator, like they do not hang out well together, right? Like if you're trying to edit as you're creating, it's really going to slow the process down. So can we really just hold space to create and generate? And then we'll choose later when we're in a different headspace and it's like you can like put the other hat on or whatever, of what actually serves the piece as a whole. And so yeah, it's that teasing apart and creating space, and also knowing like part of that teasing apart is like in trauma-informed creative practices, I talk about group dynamics and how groups develop. There's going to be like this place where we kind of rumble with each other, and it doesn't have to be like this huge conflict or anything, but it's like, okay, let me figure out my role in this space, figure out everyone else's role in the space. How are we going to come together to create something?
Yeah, that's so cool.
Can I ask you a question hearing
Yes,
that now? Okay.
of course.
Okay. Okay. So now I just like, that's my outside view, right? As I often will ask, how's that on the inside? Like, do you sense that on the inside when you
As in rehearsal space?
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like because in my brain, I see you as an extremely intellectual person, that for me, I feel like a lot of things that we do might be deeper in my brain than maybe, you know how I take things and I think like very, very deeply about them. And I think that there's some like 7-layered thing, but really it's just an extending of the arm. That's how I think. And I'm always kind of expecting that you have something similar to that because I know that you're so intellectual. Um, but I can still see for you that the generating is so essential for it to go from the vision to an ownership within everyone with GBC. And so hearing you explain it verbally, I definitely can go back and think, okay, that makes a lot of sense as we're working. That she, like you mentioned once before, that you don't have this end goal, this dream thing that you want it to look like at the end, that it's something we're discovering as we go. And me and my studio growing up brain is like, what? How do you not, but I think that the beauty of it is that it's something that we share responsibility and ownership for by the generating process.
Mhm. Yeah, very much. Cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
Like the two kind of sayings that I think I hold on to is like we discover the way on the way.
Yeah. Okay. I love that.
Yeah. And then like the more panicky version of that is like building the plane while flying it. Yeah, I like the discover the way on the way.
Yeah.
Doesn't invoke anxiety.
That feels peaceful.
Right?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Awesome. All right, so we've reached the final segment of our episode where we lean into our title of Any Other Anythings. Any Other Anythings was a phrase that was used in our rehearsals that was essentially a last call for topics to be brought up before we closed out rehearsal. So I'm refraining that slightly here to ask you if there's anything you want to spark a conversation about.
I had mentioned beforehand, like I'm pretty open, especially where season 4 of Any Other Anythings is going to be mostly my voice. So yeah, I don't know. What would you like to spark a conversation about? Is there anything as the ramblings have happened that you want to dig into more?
Definitely for me. So because I had you as my freshman year professor, you're one of the first professors I had, and you've been someone in my life, this, that I've looked up to, and I really appreciate you, and I've learned so much from you, and I feel like what you've taught me has really shaped me into who I am as an educator now. So I was curious if there's anyone in your life that you can think of that has been that person for you before you have become this serial entrepreneur.
Oh, that's tricky. I'll also say, just like thinking of like when we first overlapped, so 2017,
Mhm.
I was still figuring out a lot of the stuff that I talk about today.
Okay.
So like you've also I think about like 2017 somatics. I feel like there was a shift in 2018
Mm-hmm.
of how I taught. And I feel like there's a massive shift generally for me in 2018. But I think you've also seen an evolution or experienced this evolution of how I talk about things around trauma-informed creative practices. And I don't think I would say I formally brought trauma-informed creative practices into a classroom until 2018.
Yeah, I would say that's accurate too.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. So in terms of like who shaped me and that kind of journey, I feel like there isn't one person. It's definitely been kind of eclectic, which is like how I do everything. A little bit of this, a little bit of that. And very often for me, it's general movements that shape me. So like my shift towards my shift towards like focusing on mobility work and like that kind of thing. Like I saw that kind of movement rise up within the fitness industry, and it was like, oh, this is really important. Like, how is that going to shape me physically, having practiced that more? And in turn, how does that shape like everything else that I do? I mean, I mentioned like Sandra Hardy, Dr. Sandra Hardy, who did I talk to? Maybe I brought this up already in a podcast, but like my thesis in my capstone in undergrad, she didn't feel like doing her assigned readers theater time slot, so she just like gave me that time slot for her for my thesis. So it was like really easy to have a full evening length performance because she did that. And yeah, I think it's like the opportunities that really came forward. And one is also Terry Daniel Lacey. What y'all don't know about me, I know I got my reputation as like the somatics teacher and like very like loosey goosey. I'm a jazzerina on the inside. And so Terry and I, Terry invited me to co-choreograph a evening length ballet to contemporary ballet to Carmina Burana at Robinson Ballet in 2009, I think. So to like co-choreograph with a professor was really cool in undergrad, and like to do an evening length work. That's my first real introduction to evening length work. So just like being a part of that creative process and seeing how to structure it was really important. And then I'll also add, like, people are always like surprised to hear this, but so my master's in higher education program, I use that every single day, even though I'm not in higher ed anymore. So it's a long title. The easier way to say it is like it's in educational psychology. And I use that all the time, that body of knowledge. And so Susan Gardner and Elizabeth Allen, like they definitely shaped how I engage. And even how I talked about this with like my committee for my MFA thesis. One of them asked me once, like, how do I run a rehearsal and what's my approach? Because it's very different than what they were seeing with other choreographers. And I think it comes from my higher ed work, that educational psychology body of knowledge. Yeah, because like, why not? Like, I'm very critical of like how rehearsals are run. And I think it's because I have that kind of, yeah, that wisdom, which also, like, I think vice versa, they'd probably say like I use it in very different ways, but it's that application that's really important and really shapes a lot of how I do things. So yeah, which goes back to the interdisciplinary thing. Brought it around. It's not quite Xanadu, but it works.
But it's pretty darn close.
Yeah.
Wow, that's so cool. Yeah. Wow.
That's the journey of an answer.
It is, but I feel like it really speaks to you and how I've seen like change just in the time that I've known you as well. Just seeing how and I think even now, even 5-10 years from now, it probably will be different than how it is today. And I think that's one thing that's really powerful, is that understanding that even when you are the rehearsal director, or you are the person that's in charge of the things, that the way it is now isn't always effective 10 years from now, that things are supposed to change and adapt with the people that you have in the world you live in.
Yeah. Yes, I've been thinking a lot about like investing in the evolution of ourselves, each other, a company, like that's something about like investing in an evolution.
Yeah.
Like, not just growth. It's not
right.
It's not just development. It's like, no. There's like energy going into it. And I think so the arts were hit hard during COVID. Education was hit hard during COVID. I think, well, I have a lot of thoughts, but I'm curious, as someone who, like, you graduated during a pandemic.
Yeah.
You got into dance, well, like you did your what's your teaching thing? What do you?
Student teaching.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Your teaching thing before you graduated. I'm curious, like, what's your experience and what do you see as like where the arts and where education, dance, etc. is going?
That's a good question, because I think about that a lot. Because in the education world, there's a lot of blame and a lot of frustration with students, by saying, oh, well, it's the COVID generation. They don't want to work hard. They don't want to do things. And I think that what the problem is they don't know how to fall in love with things anymore. And so I feel like what my hope and my goal is not to raise a generation of studio competitive dancers. My hope and my goal is to raise a group of students that love to dance, that love to perform, that love to work together as a team. And I think that it's so easy for colleagues and other like high schools to be like, well, they have a better dance program, but my girls can turn better. That's not at all my hope, especially because I teach in a low income area where this is their only chance to get the arts. And my hope and my goal is to teach them the richness and the impact the arts will have on their life forever. Because a lot of them are immediately going to go into the workforce. And so a lot of them might lose touch with the arts. And I think the only thing that got me through the pandemic for me was the arts, was dance, was theater, was music. And I grew up doing all three. So without having those to help me through, I don't know if I would be functioning, to be perfectly honest. And I am hoping that I can teach students how to use the arts as almost a coping mechanism, for lack of a better word, of this is how we can find healing in our hurts, or this is how we can express ourselves. So I definitely have had to lose sight of my pride of wanting to be the best. That is the number one thing that COVID has taught me, because I didn't go into college being the best dancer at all. I was the worst by far. But I think I loved it the most. And so I think that's the difference, is I loved it the most. And so I had dance teachers growing up that helped me love it. And so I want to be that for my kids, that they don't have to be the best. They just have to love it.
Yeah. That's freaking gorgeous. What's also like making me think about is like, so the studio that I grew up in, like rural Maine, not a lot of options. It was either you go to this studio and you become a competitive dancer, and yes, you will be good, and yes, you could like climb the ladder of whatever you want to in the field, or you go to this other studio and you learn to love dance.
Right.
And so I went to the one where I learned to love dance.
Me too.
Well, I mean, my parents put the one where I would learn to love. Yeah.
Same.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, I think it's really interesting. I mean, like Sir Ken Robinson's work, and like, you know, you have to like be good at it. It's like, no, you got to enjoy it.
Right.
And then you'll stick with it long enough that you probably will be quite good at it.
Great. Yeah. Definitely.
But it doesn't work the other way, I don't think.
No, it doesn't.
So
yeah.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for asking me.
Yeah. Would you like to do any other questions? Did you have other questions?
I had one last one. Okay. So you've kind of touched on this just a little bit. So we're moving a little bit back to GBC. Okay. So in my last year at GCU, one of my professors talked to us about our druthers. Like, what is your, if you had no budget, if you had no limits, if you had nothing to stop you, what is your goal? What is the hope? So I'm curious, what are your druthers for GBC?
Oh, what are my druthers?
And feel free to be as vague as you'd like, just because I know that you like to discover as it comes. So.
I do like to discover the way on the way, but I will also say, like, I feel like I have a much clearer vision after the past 2 years. And like, cool, I'm going to drop an F-bomb. So if anyone's listening and you would like to mute, that would be the time to do so. I've kind of reached this point of like, fuck the starving artist archetype. And like, not being like super aggressive about it, just like, I'm over it.
Right. Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of language around like abundance and like, oh, we're gonna have like an abundance of all these things. Like, I don't need an abundance. I just need enough.
Right. Yeah.
And I want to have a space where like everyone who's a part of Gray Box Collective has enough.
Yeah.
And then it's really shared. It's just like this shared community where there is enough, and there, like, that scarcity mindset does not need to exist. And it's more about that and trusting that the art will follow. Like I think about the process, I think about the products, and I think about the organization as a whole. And I think I've talked about before, like standing in the integrity of the work, being proud of the work that we do. I also have thought about for a while, like, and maybe this kind of ties into your like kind of mission with your students. I've thought about for a while, I'd rather be worth knowing than well known.
Yeah.
And I feel like cool, worth knowing, check. Now I'd like that well-known part so that the funds can come in and that we can really like move forward with a pretty epic vision. And like I see like, the cool like, sets and all that kind of stuff. I don't think, like, I'm not really interested in the spectacle. Because unless like the budget allows for everyone to have enough, and then we can add spectacle. But that, I think, needs to be the priority. I've been thinking a lot about like just like allowing humans to be in like a performance space and like showing humans doing beautiful things that humans do, as opposed to like the performer with the leg this high and this many turns, and like a very like quantitative approach. I'm gonna be thinking about this question for a while. Cool.
Yay. Yay.
So good questions.
Thank you. Do you have any other anythings, Molly?
No, just that, like, well, I guess I don't have any other anythings. I'm prepared for checkout. I think I feel good for any other anythings. Do you have any other anythings?
I do not. Okay. I feel very content. Cool. Awesome. All right. Well, we've reached the end of our episode, so we're going to wrap this out with the checkout. Molly, how are you doing, and what are you thinking about?
I'm doing really well. I think a lot of interactions lately have been quite draining. So like, thank you for like a lovely one-on-one interaction that like brought some energy back in. That was great. What am I thinking about? I mean, my druthers. Cool. I'll carry that one with me. Like a random text like, I got it. I'm also just thinking of like, and as soon as I say it, it's gonna like crumble, but like my cat normally comes out about 3:30 to demand dinner, and that hasn't happened. And I just feel like very lucky for that moment, because I was like, oh man, we're gonna have to like pause and then like start it. And then, so
That's so funny.
that's like low-key stress about like the cat interrupting this. Yeah. So yeah, that's where I'm at. That's what I'm thinking about. Abby, how about you?
Yeah, like you said, I'm feeling very full is the word I'm thinking of. I feel filled. I feel like I've been kind of running on empty. And so having a fulfilling conversation is always fills me up. Me as an extrovert, talking with people fills me up a lot. But not talking because I have to, talking because I enjoy it. So thank you for that, Molly. This is awesome. And I love getting to know about you. Little obsessed with you. So all right. So yeah, that's the end of episode 11.
Yes, that's it. So for listeners, this is the last interview. We've come full circle from everyone passing hosting responsibilities. So it's back to me, and I will see you, listener, in the next episode to just kind of wrap up the season. I haven't listened to any other episode, so I might do a listen and then do wrap up. I don't know. We'll see. But yeah, shall we do?
Yes, let's seal it.
Okay.
Okay.
Are we gonna do a full one with a kick?
Oh, we don't have to, but I was just prepared.
I just need to adjust as well. And the cat has now joined me, so.
Oh, wonderful.
I'll avoid him.
Awesome.
Awesome. Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you.